Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education. Featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
Welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. It's Alexis Avila, your host. And make sure to join our community. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and YouTube. Just make sure you type in Prepped and Polished and you'll arrive. Sign up for our free 1-hour SAT strategy course. Go to satstrategysecrets.com. It's a free course, no catches. Have a question or reaction during the podcast or after? Please email me at radio@preppedandpolished.com. Let's get to today's guest. This is episode number 98 with Mike Berry, father of 8 adopted children and author of Confessions of a Parent blog. Welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. It's Alexis Avila, your host. And make sure to join our community. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and YouTube. Just make sure you type in Prepped and Polished and you'll arrive. And sign up for our free 1-hour SAT strategy course. Go to satstrategysecrets.com. It's a free course, no catches. Have a question or reaction during the podcast or after? Please email me at radio@preppedandpolished.com. Let's get to today's guest. Today's guest is Mike Berry. Mike is a speaker and writer of the wildly successful blog, Confessions of a Parent. It's a blog committed to helping overwhelmed parents find hope and humor on the sometimes difficult journey of parenting. If you're in the pre-adoptive phase, get Mike's free video series, Creating Your Adoption Roadmap. Mike Berry's been married almost 16 years and raises, and I'm not making this up, 8 amazing children, all who have been adopted. Along with being an adoptive parent, Mike has also served as a foster parent for 8 years. On today's episode, Mike shares his process, his experiences raising 8 adopted children, and you'll learn a lot about the adoption process, some of the best ways to raise happy adopted children, and some of the challenges adopted children face today. Hey, Mike, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Glad you're here. So can you share with the audience a bit of your background, maybe focus on some key life moments that brings you here with us today as a speaker and a writer of a very popular blog and parent community, the Confessions of a Parent?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I have been involved in working with families for nearly 2 decades. I actually spent from the late 90s, really, I'll just round it up to that, late 90s until about a year ago, working in the church full-time as a full-time family life pastor. Did a number of different things there, worked with students, worked with children and their families. And I did that up until about a year ago, and then stepped out of that. Actually, I was let go from that. And I had already really developed a heart for communicating to families, reaching out to parents, specifically overwhelmed, stressed out families, parents, and then even on a deeper level, adoptive and foster parents, because that's what we are. We're adoptive parents and we are former foster parents. And so through that, really over the last 5 years that I was working with families, I really grew this heart for reaching more than just the local church community, reaching around the globe to parents who were overwhelmed, stressed out, tired, worn out. And out of that, the idea to create a blog arose. And so we created in 2011, I birthed the idea for confessionsofaparent.com. And the idea behind that site was that it would not be I did not want it to be a how-to on parenting. I didn't want it to be another educational site, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I knew that the world was filled with a lot of those, which are great, and there's talk shows and there's books, all great. all teaching you how to be a better parent. What I realized was that there's not that many resources that just look at you and say, listen, I know you're tired. I know you're overwhelmed. I've been there too. And I realized
Wow.
that there's something powerful and something healing when somebody looks at you and says, I know exactly what you're going through. And so I
Absolutely.
realized that what parents need, specifically parents who are going through they're on a tough journey, which in our case would be adoptive and foster parents mostly. There's parents in general are tired. Realize that that they need a community. They need a place where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to raise your hand and say, yeah, I'm struggling. So that's really where the idea for confessionsofaparent.com was born. And we launched it a year later in 2012, and it's grown. It started off with I think we had like 500 visitors the first month. Now we have over 20,000 visitors a month. So
Wow.
in 15 different countries. So it's pretty cool. It's been a really, really fun ride. So
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. So
thank you.
now for parents, and I'm sure you can check out those many how-tos about
Oh yeah.
to answer this question, but the adoption process is daunting. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. There's a lot of obstacles, money, the waiting game.
Yeah.
What has been the biggest obstacle you find for parents trying to adopt, and what's the biggest myth that parents should know when going through the adoption process?
Oh wow, those are great questions. The way I'll answer the first question is that most pre-adoptive parents, and when I say pre-adoptive, I'm talking about either people who have just begun the process or are thinking about it and have no idea where to begin. We'll classify those as pre-adoptive. The biggest thing that the biggest obstacle they have is that they just don't know where to begin, or they don't have any. They have a lot of questions and very few answers. That's actually where we were at 13 years ago. We started off. It's kind of a long story, but the short story is that we decided to adopt, and when we started, we just didn't have. We had all these questions, but we just didn't have that many answers. And that was also kind of an era. We're looking at over a decade ago. Adoption really hadn't reached the spotlight like it is today.
Okay.
So there were. It was getting there. But you
Sure.
didn't have the celebrity adoptions like you do now.
Sure.
With the Angelina Jolie, the Brad Pitt, people like that. And so doesn't have much, and you didn't have movies, like The Blind Side or The
Sure.
Odd Life of Timothy Green, things like that.
Sure.
So the biggest obstacle we faced and people face today is that they don't know where to start, and they have a lot of questions and not that many answers. So that's probably, I would say, hands down one of the biggest. Before you get into the money, before you get into the specifics of paperwork and process and training and home studies, it's that deer in headlights. Oh my gosh, where do I even begin? Because most people jump in, they're going to jump first. Like, oh yes, we're going to do this. They get excited.
Right.
You take the family who's had fertility issues and they cannot have children biologically. They're super excited.
Right.
They're ready to go, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, what? I don't know. Where do we start? Where do we begin? So that's probably biggest obstacle. The biggest myth is that we've found in the thousands of families we've worked with. It's the hero complex. And what I mean by that is this: people oftentimes, not always, if they're just beginning the adoption process, they make the mistake of seeing themselves as Superwoman or Superman.
Wow.
That I'm going to swoop down into this country, or I'm going to swoop into this rough neighborhood, and I'm going to rescue this child.
Right. Right.
And the problem with that is that it gives you a distorted view of yourself, and it gives you a distorted view of adoption. Because that's not what adoption's about. Adoption is not about rescuing a child from a devastating, dark situation, even though you may be doing that. Adoption is about changing the life of a child and changing your life, and then overall changing the world. So that's that's probably the biggest myth that people have, is that there's several, and I would say that's the biggest one, the hero complex. The second one, if I can add one more in there,
sure.
That I've heard mostly from men, is that I don't know if I could ever love a child that's not my own. That's how they say it, and I'm quoting that. I don't think I could ever love a child that's not my own. Now, there's a problem with that statement. Number one, classifying a child as your own or not is not a correct way to say it. The correct way would be to say, I don't know if I could love a child that's not biologically mine, right? But the other problem there is that you're underestimating the capacity of your heart, of your humanity when you say that and when you believe that. I thought that 13 years ago when we started, but it absolutely washed away. First time my daughter looked up at me, opened her eyes to the world, gone was that thought forever. So it just, it washes away. You underestimate the capacity and the depth of your heart when you buy into that myth. So
definitely, that makes a lot of sense. And you have 8 adopted children.
Correct.
How is that possible?
Oh man, it's $1 million question.
Well, how do you manage your time and stress? I'm sure it's very busy.
It is, and well, first off, we get that question a lot when people hear that we have 8 children. In general, that's we get a huge, eyes go up and people say how and what for, and why. And the short answer there is that we, out of our 8 children, 6 of them came to us through foster care. So financially, if we're looking at it from a financial point of view, financially it was very doable because foster to adopt is the cheapest form of adoption, virtually no cost at all. In fact, I'm talking like just maybe a couple $100.
Right.
And right there, all you're doing is paying for like processing fees. The attorney's usually covered, so on and so forth. So it's state funds at all. Okay. So if you're looking for the cheapest route, foster to adopt is the way to go. So 6 out of our 8 children were foster to adopt. The other 2 were through private agencies. Mm-hmm. More expensive, of course, right. Significantly more expensive. On the time side of it, I'll give a huge shout out to my wife because she is a genius at managing chaos. I'm not. I go on overload quickly.
Yeah.
That's a typical male thing, but it's also, typical,
definitely.
When you have like an art brain like I do as a writer, you can get overloaded quickly.
Yeah.
So multitasking is not in your toolkit of things that you do. But anyways, what we have, I'll be very honest and very candid and tell your audience that this time management has been a tension that we've had to learn to manage, not a problem that we could fix, because it's an ongoing issue. Now, there's ways to do that. You cannot solve time management. I don't believe you can. Mm-hmm. You can do your best to manage that tension. It comes down to communication. Yeah. We've had to learn communication. We've had to learn, Kristen and I, my wife and I have had to learn how to talk and how to communicate details. One of the ways we did that is we use a shared calendar. Our iCal is shared, so we both have a shared calendar. We've developed what we call an ironclad schedule, and that means that while our kids are at school, we bust our tails to get work done. for her, she works at an office. She goes to a place of business. I work from home. So from 9 till 3, it is go time. And then we know that from 3 o'clock on, no work. It's complete focus on our kids. And then along with that, we've had to be very intentional about time together as a couple. So at night, our younger kids go to bed by 8 o'clock, 7:30 to 8 o'clock bedtime. It's lights out. That's it. Our junior high daughters, our older daughters, are in bed by 9:30.
9:30.
Because that's our time. After that, it's our hour and a half, hour time together to watch a show, spend time together. So really, to put that into like just a couple of words, it's intentionality, communication, and it's consistent work. I mean, you have to consistently work on it. Even today, we had to sit down and say, okay, listen, we need to walk through this. Kristen is catching an early flight out to the West Coast tomorrow morning, and I'm here all weekend on duty. And then next weekend we flip-flop where I catch a flight to Tampa, and she's at home. So we've had to work through,
right.
Okay, so how's this going to work out? How are we going to balance this? But then throughout the week, here we have to be very intentional. I will tell you, it's not something we've solved. I don't think anybody solves it.
Right.
But I do think you can do what you can,
You can.
to manage it. But you have to be intentional. That's the thing. And here's the thing. I've just really learned that. I mean, up until just past summer, no lie, I've kind of been terrible at balancing, managing time. I'm still not that great at it, but I'm learning. And I realized at the end of the summer, if I really want to stretch our time, we need to be intentional about this. So that's a little bit of how we do it.
That's amazing, because it's not a perfect science. I mean, you're never going to win if you look at what you're not managing.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
So it's also about attitude, it seems like, it's like, look, I did the best I could. I got this ironclad schedule, but if something falls through the cracks one day, there's always the next day.
Yeah. And that's you make a good point there. I think it's also about what we've learned is that you can't beat yourself up if you have a day that didn't work out the way you wanted it to. I mean, even today, this day today is not working out the way I wanted it to. My morning did not work out the way I wanted it to. But there's tomorrow. Tomorrow, definitely. I get back up, I pull myself out of bed, I go get some exercise, I get to my office, I start, I do my best. And that's a good point right there, that if you fail, you pick yourself back up and you start again tomorrow.
Keep trucking.
That's the way you succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about, I went to your website a couple times, and it's amazing. Check it out. But you see on this that you have a video series, creating your adoption roadmap. Wondering how we can get a copy of that. And then you also got a book, Adoptive Parent Toolbox. How do you get a copy of that? And what kinds of stuff will you find in there, the video series, the ebook?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me tell you about the video series, which is Creating Your Adoption Roadmap. That is actually a free, we give that away for free. The only thing it costs you is your email address.
Yeah.
And if you visit our site, very top right side, you can opt in by dropping your email in there, your name, clicking the button, and you're subscribed. You're opted into our email newsletter. And then in exchange, we send you the link to access those videos. And again, it's free. And it's the idea behind that is if there's for anybody who's in that pre-adoptive phase, thinking about adoption, or you've just started, or you're the deer in headlights, Creating Your Adoption Roadmap is the video series for you, because what I do in that series is I unpack 3 critical components of starting the journey. I talk about the mental shift that you need to make, the switch that you need to make in your mind before you begin. Then we walk through some big questions that arise on the journey, especially after you first start, like, whoa, I didn't, how do I do this? Or I didn't foresee this, what do I do? We talk about those. And then we also talk about what a strong support community looks like and why you need one. So that's a free download. Just visit the blog. In fact, there's a couple of ways to get it. If you hang around the blog long enough, a little box will pop up right in the middle that invites you to download the series. Again, it only costs your email address, and it's a good short series for anybody who's just beginning the process.
Nice.
The book, the Adoptive Parent Toolbox, is it's an ebook, and if you visit, you can link to it through our blog. On the very top bar of the blog, there's a link that says book, a little category. I think category. It says book. You can click there, and it'll take you right to the landing page. And if not on the blog, visit adoptiveparenttoolbox.com, and nice. you can purchase the ebook there. And awesome. It's a $9.99 ebook, and that's how you get it. And to answer your other question, I told you a little bit about creating your adoption roadmap. The Adoptive Parent Toolbox is what we call a brain dump of everything we've learned, the insights we've gained, the stories we've heard and even lived personally over a 13-year journey. So what we've done, we decided that, going back to that very first question you asked, when you're just starting out, or even on the journey, and you're trying to figure out, what do I do? Where do I go? You have all these big questions, and you don't seem to find many answers. We wrote the Adoptive Parent Toolbox out of that realization that we didn't have any resources when we first started. And so our heart is to create a really in-depth resource
nice.
For anybody who's beginning the process, anybody who has questions, anybody who's thinking about going through the adoption process again, or even anybody who's a foster parent and thinking about either transitioning to adoption or just has some burning questions when it comes to caring for children. So what we did is we sat down over a 6 to 8 month period and just really dumped out on paper everything that we've personally been through and everything that people we've walked with have been through, and formed it into a book. And the way it's designed is it's like a toolbox. So if you pop open a toolbox, and you're looking for tools to fix your sink, you're not going to need a saw, but you are going to need a wrench. So you don't need the saw, but you do need the wrench. Same thing with adoption. You may be in the post-adoptive phase of adoption. Well, you're not going to really need to know what to do to start off.
Yeah.
But you may need to look into trauma and disorders that can come from that children have when they come from difficult places. So it's designed for you to just be able to go to the place that you need to find the resource you need. So
that's
it's
awesome.
Just like a toolbox.
That's awesome. One thing that came to my mind is there's obviously some shady adoption agencies probably that prey on your money.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was wondering, do you give tips on who to avoid, or do you not want to badmouth it? That's just not good.
Oh, no. We're pretty honest. We actually say in the book, only work with credible agencies.
Oh, okay.
Only. We actually say, in fact, I did a video series along with this ebook. The video series isn't available anymore because we're actually transitioning that over into a new online course that's going to release in 2016. But in one of the videos, I interviewed the director of a thriving adoption agency, a private agency. And I actually asked her, I said, now in the book, we say never work with anybody but a credible agency. Never respond to Craigslist ads or, want ads in the newspaper. And I said, what do you think about that? And she was like, absolutely. Don't ever do that. She said, we tell people that all the time. So the truth is, and like I said, I'm pretty honest. I don't pull any punches. You're setting yourself up for disaster by responding to Craigslist ads, Facebook ads, any sort of ads that do not come from a credible agency.
Yeah.
For instance, the agency that we worked with here in Indianapolis, where we're from, is Adoption Support Center. And you look on their site and immediately you see all their credentials. Right. They tell you exactly what you're getting into. There have been very transparent, very detailed. There have been story after story that has come out in the news about people who, for a number of different reasons. They want to adopt. Their heart is just overflowing. They've been through fertility issues, couldn't get pregnant. They're ready to adopt. And out of that emotion, they jump. They see an ad on Craigslist, or they see a Facebook ad pop up, or they see something in the local newspaper, or a website happens to come their way. And they think, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And the person on the other end, or people, whoever it is, not 98% of the time it's a scam, are promising really fast placement, less expensive than what agencies charge. Run the other way. Run the other way. Delete that message from your inbox. It's fraud.
Huge.
Always work with a credible agency. Always. Can't say that enough. So we talk about that in the book. We have a whole section on finances, on what it's going to cost. We have a whole section on what to avoid, avoiding those scams. We have a section on dealing with trauma. We actually talk about how to raise your funds without going into debt, which is actually something it's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. if I could bring up a little tension, because we live in a world that is built on debt, so it's kind of the joke that we've always had around here is, man, we when we first started, we took this loan out, but what would have happened if we had defaulted on the loan? We wouldn't have had our kid repossessed, would we? So it's always a joke. That would not have happened, and we did not default on the loan. So
absolutely, that's good to hear.
Yes.
So that's awesome. It's just a comprehensive toolbox of information.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, so I'm wondering. Okay, so I know that when you hear that when adopted children get to a certain age, they start to question their origin. So I'm wondering, you got 8 kids.
Yep.
Have any of your children asked or showed curiosity about their birth parents? And if so, how did you, as an adoptive parent, deal with this issue?
Another great question. The first thing I'll tell you is that, and we actually talk about this in the book too. We're honest with our kids from the get-go. At the age, 2 of our children came to us as infants. Of course, my firstborn daughter was an infant. We adopted her the moment she was born. My youngest son came to live with us through foster care when he was 3 days old. And from the moment of understanding, we have been honest and said and let them know that you're adopted. And 3 of my children are African American, so that's pretty obvious. There's a pretty obvious difference, but we're very honest, very open, and we talk about birth parents in a very honorable light. Even if they've done some things in their life that has not been honorable, we still show the utmost respect to birth parents. We've been able to visit with several of our birth parents, not all of them. Some of them we have not been able to. But we've dealt with a few situations over the last several years where there's been some brokenheartedness, either because a birth parent did not show up for a visit, or because with one of our kids, there's no relationship with a birth parent. And we've allowed that grief. That's one of the most important things you can do, is allow that grief because that grief is real. There's real loss there. It would be the same as if you or I lost a father or a mother, and no longer had them in our life, or we never had met them. Our grief would be real. And so we allow that grief to happen because it's healthy for that. It's healthy to do that. But then we also make sure that we're redirecting, and we're also spotlighting the positive points of life now as it currently is.
Perfect.
Which is huge. That's a huge thing, because it's very easy to allow that brokenness to become something more, if you're not careful. So we've had those questions before, and we haven't. I will tell you this: we haven't freaked out. We're non-panicky people, anyways. But for something like that, we don't panic over that. And we've actually counseled many, many adoptive parents who have had their child almost as if they're lobbing an emotional grenade, say something like, well, you're not my real mom. You're not my real dad.
Right.
Well, they freak out over that. And we've had our kids say that before to us.
Sure.
Or they've said something to the effect of, well, when do I get to go live with my real mommy or my real daddy? One of the most important things you can do is not freak out. Because if you freak out, it lets the kid know, okay, there must be some kind of issue here. And then they get panicked, and then it just nobody gets anywhere.
Right.
So I think not panicking, being very honest, allowing the grief, and then being willing to redirect and move. That's to awesome. What I always say is point to a healthier way of thinking, point to a healthier frame of mind.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Have your experiences as a foster adoptive parent differed from your experience as an adoptive parent, or have there been no real differences?
It's not. There hasn't been a major difference. Of course, with our first daughter, it was a private adoption, and she was ours legally. On paper, she was ours. When in the years that we were foster parents, you had to ask permission if you wanted to leave the state, or if you had to go to the doctor, or if a rash suddenly showed up.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of like we actually found ourselves at times looking at our adoption, being grateful for private adoption, because it's like, I don't have to tell anybody, on this blessed earth that I'm leaving the state with my firstborn daughter because she's mine,
Yeah.
through the state. So there is that difference. But realistically, our first daughter was born in 2002. We became foster parents in 2004. So we really can't remember a day when the rest of our children did not live with us. We're not a part of it. So our firstborn daughters really just kind of walked that road with us. So for us personally, there's not a major difference. We have walked with many families who have had some big differences. Two different, and a lot of that comes down, most of the time it comes down to you adopt a child at birth, you're the only parents he or she has ever known. But then you bring a child in who's 4 or 5 years old, and there's trauma and there's some special needs. That's the big difference that people deal with.
Sure.
So,
what have you found is the best way for you to raise an adopted child so she feels good about herself, and become successful going into young adulthood?
Mm-hmm.
I guess just like raising any child. I mean, there's no difference, right? But I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, it's it comes down to perspective, and I will say this, and this will be an important thing for anybody in the audience who is considering adoption or has a traditional family. All their children are biological. It comes down to perspective, and I think it's really one of the things that we often, all the time, counsel families in this situation in the pre-adoptive phase. We tell them that we challenge them to never look at the children who come to them through adoption or through foster care as any different than their biological kids. And we know many families who do that. And in fact, I was having lunch with a friend back in the spring, and he and I went to high school together. We hadn't seen each other for 20 years. And as he's showing me pictures of his family, he's telling me who his kids are. And he goes through his kids who are biologically his. He doesn't say anything about them, but then when he gets to his two youngest sons, he says, "No, these are my adopted kids." Now, there's a problem with that.
That's what you're saying.
You're putting a title.
Don't do that.
Then you're differentiating. You're automatically making a difference. And so the perspective that we challenge people to have is you see all of your children as equal. You don't have adopted kids, you don't have biological kids, and please, for the love of all that's good and holy, don't say you have kids that are your own and then kids who are adopted. That's so incorrect on so many levels. You have biological kids, or you have children through adoption. But at the end of the day, you have children.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if some of my children are biological, some of them are adopted, they're my children. If I say that these are my adopted children and these are my biological children, I'm automatically putting a difference. I'm putting a definition on them. And that causes a lot of problems.
So you, as a parent, have a responsibility not to put a definition. But unfortunately, in this society, we're so judgmental. How do you deal with, that person across the street saying, "Oh, well, he's got those. Are those your adopted kids?" Is that
right?
Okay to say, or do you have to teach them?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. We've actually written and spoken on that a lot, because that's a huge thing. That's especially a big topic when people are first going through one of the first things I learned in our pre-adoptive classes was the correct lingo. I was the person who would say, I would ask a person, "Are you ever going to have any kids of your own?" Back before I went through the adoption process. And then suddenly I realized, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be asking that. That's, because my firstborn, all my children are my own. They're my children. They wear my last name. So they are Barry kids. But back to your question, with people who are close to you that and I will define it like this: a next door neighbor, an extended family member, a person you go to church with, a person you work with, you give them the ignorance card. It's a get out of jail free card. Okay. And the ignorance card is, I'm going to give you grace because you don't know what you're talking about. You're unfamiliar with adoption. And so it's okay that you say, it's okay that you ask me, do I have any kids of my own? It's okay if you refer to them as my adopted kids. So it's the ignorance card, free card for you to have. It's redeemable with all adoptive families, hopefully. But then once they use that ignorance card, you bring them into enlightenment. You enlighten them. And you let them know, so I want to walk you through what just for your sake. And you always make it as if you're benefiting them, because you really are. I mean, you really are. Because quite frankly, a person who goes around and talks about someone's real kids or, kids of their own, it's starting to become a social faux pas to do that, because adoption and foster care are now so widely known. Even people who aren't adoptive families or adoptive parents understand the differences. So you enlighten them, but then after that, there's no more ignorance card. It's
right.
It's yeah, and
like
you may get to a point. We've gotten to this point where we avoid. We keep it. In fact, we've actually we were doing a workshop back in the spring out in Colorado, and we were talking about talking about how who you can bring into your inner circle of support, and we actually have like different levels. Like there are some people we tell adoptive and foster families, not everybody belongs in your support community. Right. They don't. In fact, the people who hail you as being angels or heroes, 9 times out of 10, you don't want them in your support community. And the reason for that is that they're also the quickest to turn on you, because it's like I'm sitting here and I'm looking at you through a computer screen and we're states away from each other.
Yeah.
And I see you do something where you're sitting. I'm here and you're there. I can see it from where I'm at.
Right.
But I'm not there experiencing it personally with you. So if you reach behind you and you grab a Coke and you take a drink, I can see you doing that, but I'm not there and I can't take a drink of Coke as well, or I can't, you know what I'm saying? So there's like a divide, there's like a distance. So people who hail you and tell you things like, "Oh, you're so amazing,"
Right.
it's like they're sitting 5 states away looking at your life. They have no clue what's going on there in your life, but they're so quick to hail you from a distance. Wow. But if they were to get up close and they were to experience a little bit of your life personally, they're also the quickest to turn tail on you. or judge you.
That's really like profound insight right there.
Yeah, I mean, most people
you would think that the person who says that you're a hero or something like that should be in your top tier sanctum, but
yeah, it's not the case.
No.
You know what you want? You want people who you could absolutely fall apart in front of. You could cuss and scream and break stuff and rant and rave,
right,
and they won't flinch.
Yeah.
They'll just put their arms around you and say, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Those are the people you want.
That's really interesting because it's kind of like in a way, it's like the celebrity mentality too. Like, because you put these stars on a pedestal, but as soon as somebody does something wrong, they're being crucified. So
yeah. So really back to what we were talking about. You have the ignorance card. You play the ignorance card. After that, ignorance. You can't claim ignorance anymore. And then a lot of times we're asked questions like, "What about in public?" The way I answer that is, "Who cares?" They're not.
Right.
This is my family. I don't care what some grumpy old man in a restaurant says about my family, and we've had that happen. It's my family; these are my kids, and I don't owe anybody in this world an explanation.
Perfect.
So, this is my family.
What projects are you working on now? Anything new with your blog? Books coming out? You said something about a 2016 launch of a course.
Yeah, actually, this is something really cool, and you're depending on when you air this, it may have already happened.
Okay.
Our blog is actually going through an overhaul right now, and it's going to relaunch or launch the beginning of October. I think the first full week of October, right around the 9th or 10th. It's going to relaunch, has a whole new look to it, new photography, has some new features to it. The other thing that we're launching right along with that is our parenting podcast, which is called Honestly Speaking. That debuts on October 14th.
Nice.
We're really excited about that. We've been working on that for about a year, and we're finally releasing that. There's a lot of things. We're releasing several courses, and basically the best way to find out, to keep updates on that is by subscribing to our blog. When you get onto our email list, you'll stay up to date. I'm going to be releasing an online, it's a 5-session marriage boot camp that when you purchase this course over a 5-week period, you get to jump on to live calls very similar to what we're doing, and we walk through enriching your marriage and becoming a better spouse. Right behind that, on the heels of that, we're going to be doing a full-length course, 10-module course on finding rest as a parent, how to find rest, how to rejuvenate yourself. So there's a lot of things. I could fill an hour telling you about some of the projects we have. We love what we're doing. We love providing resources for parents, specifically adoptive, foster, and special needs parents. The best way to keep up to date is to get on our email list. So, and then of course that 2016 course, we'll tell you all about that too.
Perfect. Mike, so we work with a lot of teenagers, so I'm wondering if you have any advice for them as they transition to young adulthood. So any teens listening to you today, before they become these independent young adults, any advice?
The first thing I'll tell you is, I would tell them is stay calm. Stay calm. Be patient. One of the things that I did when I was an 18, 19, 20-year-old is I was so panicked. I just lived by panic. So I rushed into everything. And looking back, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have been a little more calm. So I would say stay calm. And then the other thing I would say is, you have no idea what life will look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. When I'm talking to, religious people or, Christians or people of a faith base, I say it like this: you have no idea what God is doing and what he will do. That's what I say to faith-based people. But in general, I say you have no idea what your life will look like 5 years from now. I can say that personally. When I was in college, I had no idea 20 years, how long have I been out of college? 16, 17 years later, what I would be doing now. That is unbelievably fulfilling. So stay calm, be patient, trust and know that your life is going to tell a story that you can't even imagine with your heart.
And in your case, and in many cases, life gets better.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't get easier, but I agree with you. It gets better. It does. It becomes unbelievably fulfilling when you live it to the fullest, when you follow your dreams, and not just be a dreamer, but be a doer.
Nice.
That's the thing that I've learned. Perfect.
So, Mike, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we let you go?
It's just great to be on here, and my hope with your audience is the same hope that I have every time we write, we blog, or every time we do a video, is that you walk away encouraged and you feel empowered and you feel motivated. So I hope that I can help accomplish that in some small way, and I hope that people are enriched by listening to this.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. And this wraps up our show, episode number 98 with Mike Berry. Go to www.confessionsofaparent.com to learn more about Mike's amazing community of parents. For more information about fostering, about foster parenting, and adoption, make sure to listen to episode number 25. It's my conversation with Dr. John DeGarmo, Leaving No Foster Child Behind. Episode number 99 is coming very soon, our next tutoring tips episode, so stay tuned for that one. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.